Caleb Turner stood in the middle of the street and watched the stagecoach roll in through a wall of red dust. He did not move. He did not raise his hand. 6 years ago, he had buried a wife and a daughter in the ground behind his house, and he had made a promise to God and to himself: never again. But the letter had already been sent. The woman had already come. And when Margaret Whitmore stepped down from that coach, looked him straight in the eye and said, "You must be my husband," Caleb Turner felt something he had not felt in 6 years: fear. If you enjoy stories of love, redemption, and the courage it takes to start again, subscribe to our channel and follow this story to the very end. And leave a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We'd love to know how far this story has traveled. The stagecoach driver jumped down and wiped his neck with a rag that was already brown from dust. "Marshal Turner," he called out. "Got your delivery." Caleb did not answer. He stood on the porch of his office with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, and his badge catching the brutal afternoon sun. 40 men and women lined the street of Red Hollow, Wyoming territory, and every single one of them was watching. Because every single one of them knew. Caleb Turner had posted a mail-order bride advertisement 3 months ago. Not because he wanted a wife. Because Judge Pearson had told him plain: a town marshal with no family was a man with no stake. And a man with no stake had no business wearing that badge. So Caleb had written the letter. Short, blunt, honest. "I am a widower. I am not looking for love. I need someone to maintain a household. I will provide shelter, food, and protection. That is all I can offer." 14 women had responded. He had picked the one who asked the fewest questions. Margaret Whitmore, age 26, St. Louis. And now here she was. The coach door opened and a woman stepped out into the heat. She was not tall. She was not delicate. She wore a dark traveling dress that was stained at the hem with 1,000 miles of road dust, and her hair had come loose from its pins, and her face was flushed red from the heat. But her eyes were steady. She looked across the street at Caleb Turner. He looked back. Neither of them smiled. "You must be my husband," she said. Caleb uncrossed his arms slowly. "I must be." A silence fell over the street, the kind of silence that made even the horses uneasy. Old Hattie McCrae, who ran the boarding house and had opinions about everything, leaned over to her neighbor and whispered loud enough for half the town to hear, "Lord have mercy! He looks like he's facing a firing squad." Caleb stepped off the porch. He walked toward her. He did not offer his hand. "You got luggage?" he asked. "One trunk," Margaret said. "I'll send someone for it." "I can carry it myself." "I said I'll send someone." She tilted her head, studied him the way a person studies a locked door they intend to open. "All right, then," she said quietly. "Lead the way, Marshal." He turned and walked. She followed. The town watched, and not one person on that street believed this marriage would last a month. Caleb's house sat at the edge of town, past the livery stable and the blacksmith and the cemetery, where 2 small wooden crosses stood side by side under a cottonwood tree. He did not look at the crosses as they passed. Margaret did. She said nothing. He pushed open the front door and stepped aside. "Kitchen's through there. Bedroom's on the left. Your room is on the right." She stopped in the hallway. "My room?" "That's what I said." "We're married, Marshal." "We got a piece of paper. That ain't the same thing." Margaret set her jaw. He could see the fight building in her eyes, but she swallowed it. She walked into the room on the right, looked around, and set her handbag on the bed. "The mattress is thin," she said. "I'll get you another blanket." It's 100 degrees outside. Then I reckon you won't need the blanket. He turned and walked out. She heard the front door close. Then she heard his boots on the porch. Then, nothing. Margaret Whitmore sat down on the edge of that thin mattress and pressed her hands together in her lap. She had left St. Louis with $40, a trunk full of books, and a bruise on her collarbone that had taken 3 weeks to fade. The bruise was from Harold Kessler, 52 years old, owner of the First Federal Bank of St. Louis, her father's creditor. The man who had told her father, plainly and without shame, that the debt would be forgiven if Margaret agreed to become his wife. She had refused. Her father had begged her to reconsider. She had refused again. And when Kessler had grabbed her arm in the hallway of her father's shop and pressed her against the wall and said, "You will learn to be grateful," she had driven her knee into his stomach and walked out. 3 days later, the bookshop was seized. Her father would not look at her. So Margaret had done the only thing a woman with no money and no family and no future could do in 1876. She had answered an advertisement. "I am a widower. I am not looking for love." Good, she had thought when she read it. Neither am I. The first week was silence. Caleb left before dawn. He came back after dark. He ate whatever she cooked without comment. He spoke to her only when necessary. Pass the salt, the well-pumped sticks. Don't go past the creek alone. Margaret cooked. She cleaned. She organized the shelves and scrubbed the floors and mended his shirts and did every single thing a wife was supposed to do in a house that did not feel like a home. On the third night, she set his plate down harder than usual. He looked up. "Something wrong?" he asked. "You haven't said my name once since I arrived." He paused. "Margaret." "Don't say it like you're reading a warrant." Something flickered across his face. Not anger. Something else. Something he pushed down before she could name it. "I told you what this was," he said. "In the letter. I was clear." "You were, and I still came." "Then I don't see the problem." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "The problem, Marshall, is that I left everything I had to come here. I didn't come for love. I'm not fool enough for that. But I came for a life. And sitting alone in a silent house while you pretend I don't exist is not a life." Caleb set down his fork. He looked at her for a long time. She did not look away. "My wife's name was Sarah," he said quietly. "My daughter was Emma. She was 4 years old. They were killed 6 years ago by 3 men who robbed the eastbound rail line and then rode through our property on their way south." Margaret's hands went still. "I caught those men," Caleb continued. "Every last one. I brought them in. They were tried and hanged. And when it was over, when justice was done, I went home to an empty house, and I sat at that table right there, and I waited for something to feel different. And nothing did." He picked up his fork again. "So when I tell you this is an arrangement, I ain't being cruel. I'm telling you the truth. I don't have anything left to give. And I'd rather be honest about that than make you promises I can't keep." Margaret was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm sorry about Sarah and Emma." He nodded, once. "But I'm not going to disappear into this house, Caleb. I didn't survive what I survived just to become invisible again." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for just a moment, one breath, one heartbeat, something shifted behind his eyes. Then he stood up, took his plate to the basin, and walked out to the porch. But he did not close the door behind him, and Margaret noticed. Red Hollow was a town that survived on 2 things: cattle and copper. The ranchers owned the land. The miners worked the hills east of town. And in between, 100 families scraped together whatever living they could from the dry Wyoming dirt. But that summer, something was wrong. The creek that fed the south pastures had been drying up since May. Cattle were thin, tempers were shorter, and every week another small rancher rode into town with the same complaint. Someone was diverting the water. Margaret heard about it on her fourth day when she walked to the general store and found 3 ranch wives arguing at the counter. "It's the railroad men," one of them said. "They're damming the creek up past Miller's Ridge."
"It ain't the railroad men," another snapped. "It's Black Ridge. He's been buying up water rights since spring." The third woman noticed Margaret standing in the doorway. "Who are you?" "Margaret Turner," she said, and the name felt strange on her tongue, like wearing someone else's coat. "You're the mail-order bride." "I am." The women looked at each other. Margaret could read their faces: pity, curiosity, and something harder underneath: judgment. "Well," the first woman said, "good luck with that one. The marshal ain't exactly the tender type." "I didn't come here for tender," Margaret said. She bought flour and salt and walked home. But the conversation stayed with her. That evening, she asked Caleb about the water. He was cleaning his rifle at the kitchen table. "What about it?" "The women at the store say someone's diverting the creek. They say it's a man named Blackridge." Caleb's hands went still on the rifle, just for a second. Then he resumed cleaning. "Thomas Blackridge owns the Double B Ranch north of town. Biggest operation in the territory. He's been buying up land since '69. Is he diverting the water?" "I don't know." "Have you investigated?" He set the rifle down and looked at her. "Margaret, I've been marshal of this town for 4 years. I know how to do my job." "I didn't say you didn't. I asked if you'd investigated." The muscle in his jaw tightened. "Blackridge has 12 men on his payroll, armed. He's got contracts with the territorial governor. He supplies beef to 3 army forts. A man doesn't just ride up to his gate and start asking questions." "Why not?" "Because the last man who did, a surveyor named Rawlings, rode out to the Double B in April. His horse came back without him 2 days later." Margaret sat down slowly. "And nobody looked into it?" "Rawlings had no family. No one filed a complaint. And without a body, there's no crime." "There's a missing man." "There's a missing drifter." "That ain't the same thing in Wyoming." Margaret stared at him. "That's not justice, Caleb." "No, ma'am, it's not. But it's what we've got." He picked up the rifle and walked to the back room. The conversation was over, but Margaret Whitmore had never been the kind of woman who let a conversation stay over. On Sunday, Margaret walked to the small church at the center of town. Caleb did not join her. "He hasn't set foot in here since the funeral," Reverend Ames told her after the service. "Can't say I blame him, though I do pray for him." "Reverend, I need to ask you something. Is there a schoolhouse in Red Hollow?" "Was one. Closed 2 years ago when Mrs. Foster moved east. Nobody's had the time or inclination to reopen it." "I'd like to reopen it." He looked at her carefully. "You a teacher?" "My father owned a bookshop. I've been reading since I was 4 and teaching since I was 16. I can teach reading, writing, arithmetic, and enough history to keep children from repeating it." Reverend Ames smiled, the first warm expression she'd received since arriving in Red Hollow. "I'll talk to the town council," he said, "such as it is." "Thank you, Reverend." "Mrs. Turner, a word of advice." "Yes?" "This town has been afraid of Thomas Blackridge for a long time. If you start teaching people to read, some of them might start reading things Blackridge would rather they didn't." Margaret looked at him steadily. "That's the general idea, Reverend." She told Caleb that night over supper. He stopped chewing. "You want to open the schoolhouse?"
I already spoke with Reverend Ames. He's supportive. Margaret, you've been in this town 9 days. I'm aware. You don't know these people. I know their children can't read. That's enough. He pushed his plate back. This ain't St. Louis. You can't just decide to do something and expect folks to go along with it.
People here are careful. They watch. They wait. And while they're watching and waiting, their children grow up illiterate and their wives sign contracts they can't read, and men like Thomas Blackridge buy up everything that isn't nailed down. Caleb stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her, looking out at the darkening sky. "You're going to make enemies," he said. "I didn't come here to make friends, Caleb. I came here to have a life. And a life means doing something that matters." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, without turning around, "The schoolhouse roof leaks. I'll fix it Saturday." Margaret blinked. She had expected a fight. She had prepared for a fight. Instead, she got a roof repair. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded once, still facing the window. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't met the mothers." The schoolhouse opened on a Tuesday. 7 children showed up the first day. By Thursday, there were 14. By the following Monday, 21. Margaret taught them letters in the morning and numbers in the afternoon. And during the break, she sat with the older children, some of them nearly her own age, and read to them from the books she had brought in her trunk. The ranch wives came too, not for lessons, at least not at first. They came to watch, to measure this outsider who had married their marshal and was now teaching their children. Ruth Haskell was the first to speak plainly. She was 40 years old, built like a fence post, and had buried 2 husbands and raised 5 children alone. "You read contracts?" she asked Margaret one afternoon. "I do." Ruth pulled a folded paper from her apron. My first husband, signed this with Blackridge's operation 10 years ago. Grazing rights on the north pasture. But last spring, Blackridge's men moved the fence line 200 yards south. When I complained, his foreman showed me this contract and said it was all legal. Margaret unfolded the paper and read it carefully. Then she read it again. "Ruth," she said slowly, "this contract gives Blackridge grazing rights on your north pasture for 10 years. That term expired last April." Ruth stared at her. "What?" "The contract expired. He has no legal right to that land anymore. And the fence line he moved? That's not authorized by this document at all. Even when the contract was active, it specified a boundary 50 yards north of where his men put it." Ruth's hands were shaking. "I told my husband something wasn't right. I told him." "Do you have the original land deed?" "At home, in a box under the bed." "Bring it to me tomorrow. I want to compare it." Ruth grabbed Margaret's hand, squeezed it hard. "Nobody's ever read that for me before. I took it to Blackridge's lawyer in town. He told me it was all in order." "Blackridge's lawyer told you that?" "Edgar Moss. He handles all the legal work in Red Hollow." Margaret folded the contract carefully. "Ruth, I think Mr. Moss may not have your best interests at heart." "I think Mr. Moss can go straight to hell," Ruth said flatly. Margaret almost smiled. Almost. That night, she laid the contract on the kitchen table in front of Caleb. He read it in silence. Then he set it down and rubbed his face with both hands. "You know what you're doing?" he asked. "I'm reading a contract." "You're poking a bear, Margaret. Thomas Blackridge has been running this territory his way for 20 years. He's got men. He's got money. He's got connections in Cheyenne that go all the way to the governor's office. And he's got forged contracts that are stealing land from widows. You don't know they're forged. I know the terms expired. I know the boundary lines don't match. And I know his own lawyer lied to an illiterate woman about what her own contract said." Caleb was quiet.
How many more are there? Margaret asked.
How many families in this town signed papers they couldn't read? How many of them are losing land right now because nobody ever told them the truth?
I don't know.
Then maybe it's time to find out. He looked at her across the table. The lamplight caught the lines around his eyes. Lines that were too deep for a man of 34. Lines carved by grief and silence, and years of carrying a weight he had never asked anyone to help him bear. If you do this, he said slowly, I can't protect you. Not from Blackridge. Not from his men. Not from the people in this town who'd rather keep quiet than fight. I'm not asking for protection, Caleb. Then what are you asking for? She held his gaze. I'm asking you to be the marshal you swore to be. Not the one who arrests small thieves and looks the other way when the big ones ride past. The words hit him like a slap. He stood up. His chair scraped the floor. For a moment, Margaret thought she had pushed too far. She saw the anger flare in his eyes, hot and quick and dangerous. But it wasn't anger at her. It was anger at himself. Because she was right, and they both knew it. I'll look into the water rights, he said quietly. First thing tomorrow. I'll ride out to Miller's Ridge and see for myself. Thank you. But you listen to me, Margaret. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table, his voice low and hard. You do not go near Blackridge's property. You do not speak to his men. You do not confront Edgar Moss. You bring what you find to me, and we deal with it together. You understand? Together, she repeated. That's what I said. She looked at him, this broken, stubborn, frightened man who had married a stranger because a judge told him to, and she felt something she had not expected. Not love, not yet, but respect. And in a marriage built on nothing, respect was the first real brick. Together, she said again. I can work with that. Caleb picked up the contract, folded it, and put it in his vest pocket. Then he walked to the door, paused, and said without turning around, You cooked the steak too long tonight. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Is that your way of making conversation? It's my way of saying I noticed the steak. Well, that's progress, Marshal. He almost smiled. She could see the corner of his mouth twitch, just barely, before he caught it and walked out into the hot Wyoming night. Margaret cleared the dishes, and for the first time since she had arrived in Red Hollow, she did not feel like a stranger in someone else's house. She felt like a woman with work to do. Caleb rode out before dawn. He did not tell Margaret where he was going. He did not need to. She had heard him take the contract from the table, heard him check his revolver, heard the front door close with the careful quiet of a man who did not want to wake his wife. She was already awake. She had been awake since 3 a.m, lying on that thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, turning the same thought over and over in her mind. What kind of man arrests the small thieves and lets the big ones ride past? And the harder question, what kind of man knows he's doing it? Margaret got up. She dressed. She made coffee and left a cup on the table for a man who was already gone. Then she walked to the schoolhouse. Ruth Haskell was waiting on the steps with a tin box under her arm. Land deed, Ruth said, and 3 other papers my husband signed that I never understood. Margaret took the box. How long have you been waiting? Since sunup. I didn't sleep much. Neither did I. They sat together on the schoolhouse steps, and Margaret opened the box and began to read. The land deed was clear. Jacob Haskell had purchased 160 acres from the Territorial Land Office in 1864. The boundaries were specific:
The deed was properly recorded.
The grazing contract with Blackridge was dated 1866. 10-year term. Specific boundaries that matched the deed. But the third paper, a so-called amendment, signed in 1871, changed everything. Margaret read it twice, then a third time. "Ruth, did your husband ever mention signing an amendment to the original contract?" "A what?" "A change, an addition. This paper says Jacob agreed to extend the grazing rights for an additional 20 years and expanded the boundary to include your south pasture." Ruth's face went white. "Jacob never would have done that. The south pasture is where we grow hay. Without it, we can't feed cattle through winter." "Is this his signature?" Ruth looked at the paper. Her hands were trembling. "It looks like his writing, but Jacob could barely sign his own name. He made his letters like a child, big and crooked. This is too neat." Margaret held the paper up to the light. The ink was uniform. The hand was steady, and the witness signature at the bottom belonged to Edgar Moss. "Ruth," Margaret said carefully, "I think someone forged your husband's signature." Ruth sat very still. Her jaw worked back and forth, the way it does when a person is trying not to cry and not to scream at the same time. "That land is all I have," she whispered. "It's all my children have." "I know. If Blackridge takes the south pasture, I'm finished. I can't make it through another winter without hay." Margaret folded the papers and put them back in the box. "He's not going to take it. Not if we can prove this signature is forged." "Prove it to who? Edgar Moss is the only lawyer within 60 miles. The circuit judge comes through twice a year, and Blackridge owns half the people who'd sit on a jury." "Then we don't go through Moss, and we don't wait for the circuit judge." Ruth looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we find every family in Red Hollow who signed a contract with Blackridge. We compare the documents. If there's a pattern of forgery, that's not a civil dispute anymore. That's criminal fraud. And criminal fraud is the marshal's jurisdiction." Ruth grabbed her arm. "Your husband won't go against Blackridge. Nobody will." Margaret stood up and brushed the dust from her skirt. "My husband rode out to Miller's Ridge this morning to investigate the water diversion. He may not be ready to fight, but he's not looking the other way anymore." "What changed?" Margaret picked up the tin box. "I did." She walked inside and set up the classroom. 14 children arrived by 8 o'clock. She taught them their letters. She read them a story about a boy who sailed across the ocean. And during the afternoon break, when 3 more ranch wives came to the schoolhouse with papers they could not read, Margaret Whitmore sat on the floor and read every single one. 4 of them had amendments signed by Edgar Moss. 3 of those amendments contained boundary changes that did not match the original deeds. By the time the children went home, Margaret had a stack of documents on her desk and a knot in her stomach that would not go away. She was still sitting there when the door opened and Caleb walked in. He was covered in dust. His hat was dark with sweat, and his face carried the expression of a man who had found exactly what he hoped he would not find. "The creek's been dammed," he said. "Half a mile past Miller's Ridge. Somebody built a diversion channel. Sends the water north toward Blackridge's property." "How long has it been there?" "Weeks, maybe longer. The timber's fresh, but the channel's already cut deep." Margaret pushed the papers across the desk. "Sit down, Caleb." He sat. He read. He read slowly and carefully, the way a man reads when he knows each word is going to cost him something. When he finished, he did not speak for a long time. 5 families, Margaret said. 5 contracts with amendments that don't match the original deeds, all witnessed by Edgar Moss, all expanding Blackridge's control over land and water that doesn't belong to him. This ain't proof of forgery, it's proof of bad contracts.
Ruth Haskell's husband could barely write his own name. The signature on that amendment is clean and steady. Someone else wrote it. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. Even if you're right, and I'm not saying you are, I can't arrest Thomas Blackridge on the word of a ranch wife who thinks her dead husband's signature looks wrong. Then get more words. Talk to the other families. Find the ones who are still alive and ask them if they signed those amendments. Margaret, don't tell me it's complicated. Don't tell me Blackridge is powerful. I know he's powerful. That's exactly why someone has to do something. Caleb stood up. He paced the length of the schoolhouse. 4 steps one way, 4 steps back. If I start pulling on this thread, he said, it doesn't end with Blackridge. It goes to Moss. It goes to the land office. It might go all the way to Cheyenne. And when powerful men feel threatened, they don't hire lawyers. They hire guns. Are you afraid? He stopped pacing and looked at her. Yes. The honesty of it stopped her cold. She had expected him to deny it, to bristle, to tell her she didn't understand. Instead, he just stood there and told her the truth. I've buried a family once, Margaret. The thought of doing it again... He stopped, swallowed. I can't do that again. She stood up and walked to him. Not close, not touching, but close enough that he could see her eyes and she could see his. I'm not Sarah, she said quietly, and this is not 6 years ago. But if you let fear decide what kind of marshal you are, then Blackridge has already won. And those families out there, the ones losing land and water and everything they've worked for, they lose too. Caleb looked at her for a long time. She could see the war behind his eyes. Duty against fear. Justice against survival. The man he wanted to be against the man grief had made him. Tomorrow, he said. I'll ride to the Dawson place first. Old Tom Dawson's still alive. If he says he didn't sign that amendment, I'll have enough to open a formal investigation. I'll come with you. No. Caleb. I said no. If Blackridge has men watching, and he does, I don't want you on that road. I'm not going to hide in this house. I'm not asking you to hide. I'm asking you to stay alive. The words hung between them like smoke. Margaret felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with something else, something that recognized what he was really saying underneath all that stubbornness and silence. He was afraid for her, not of her, for her. All right, she said, but you bring me what Dawson says, every word, and if he confirms what I think he'll confirm, we go to the families together. Caleb picked up his hat from the desk. Together. You keep using that word. Because you keep forgetting it. He put on his hat and walked to the door. Paused. The schoolhouse looks good, he said. You did good work in here. Then he was gone. Margaret gathered the papers, locked the schoolhouse door, and walked home in the fading heat. Her heart was beating faster than it should have been. Not from fear. Not from the walk. From the look on Caleb Turner's face when he said the word, alive. Like it mattered. Like she mattered. She told herself not to think about it. She had work to do. She had contracts to read, and families to help, and a fight to prepare for that was bigger than anything she had ever faced. But the thought stayed with her all night, stubborn and warm and impossible to ignore. He was afraid for her, and that meant something had changed, even if neither of them was ready to say it. Caleb rode to the Dawson place at first light. Tom Dawson was 71 years old, half-deaf, and meaner than a rattlesnake with a toothache. He had settled in Wyoming before the territory had a name, and he had survived drought, blizzard, Sioux raids, and 3 wives. He was not a man who frightened easily. But when Caleb showed him the amendment, Tom Dawson's face went gray. "I never signed this," he said. His voice was flat and hard and certain. "That ain't my mark. My mark is an X with a circle around it. My second wife taught me that because she said a plain X looked like I was too stupid to try. This here's just an X, no circle." "You're sure?" "Marshal, I've been making that mark for 40 years. I know what it looks like. And I know what it don't look like. That ain't mine." "Do you know who might have signed it?" "I know who benefits from it. Same man who benefits from everything in this territory. Thomas Blackridge came to me 3 years ago and offered to buy my water rights. I told him no. He offered again. I told him to go to hell. Third time he sent his foreman, big fella named Rawlings. No, not Rawlings. Cade. Jessup Cade. Mean son of a gun. He stood on my porch and told me I'd be smart to sell. What did you do?" "I showed him my shotgun and asked if he'd like to be smart enough to leave." "And after that?" Tom Dawson was quiet for a moment. "After that, my fence line moved 50 yards south. My well started running slow, and 2 of my calves disappeared in one night." He looked at Caleb with eyes that were old and tired and angry. "I reported it to your office, Marshal, a year ago. Your deputy took the report. Nothing happened." Caleb felt that like a blade between his ribs. "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry." "Sorry don't move my fence line back." "No, sir, it doesn't. But I'm moving it back." Tom Dawson studied him. "You mean that?" "I do."
Blackridge will come for you." "I expect he will." "He's got 12, maybe 15 men, armed, paid, some of them ex-army. You got a deputy who can barely hit a barn door and a town full of people who are too scared to sneeze without permission." "I know what I've got." "You got that new wife of yours, the one from back east, the one who's been reading contracts at the schoolhouse." Caleb's jaw tightened. "What about her?" "People are talking, Marshal. They're saying she's stirring up trouble. They're also saying she's the first person in Red Hollow who's told them the truth in 20 years. Tom leaned forward. "You'd better take care of that woman. Whatever's between you two, and I ain't asking, you'd better make sure she doesn't end up like Rawlings." The name hit Caleb like cold water. "Rawlings," he repeated. "The surveyor who went missing in April." "The surveyor who went to the Double B and never came back. You think that was an accident?" "I don't know what it was." "Then maybe you'd better find out, before your wife starts asking questions that Blackridge answers with a bullet." Caleb rode back to Red Hollow with Tom Dawson's words ringing in his ears, and a feeling in his gut that he had not felt in 6 years. The sick, heavy certainty that something was coming. Something he could not stop with a badge and a revolver, and the quiet authority of a man who had never been tested against an enemy this size. He found Margaret at the schoolhouse. She was alone. The children had gone home. She was sitting at her desk with a pencil and a sheet of paper, drawing a map. "What's that?" he asked. "Every property in Red Hollow that borders Blackridge's land. I've been talking to the wives. 8 families have signed contracts with his operation. 6 of them have amendments they don't remember agreeing to. 4 of them have had fence lines moved, wells run dry, or livestock go missing." She looked up at him. "What did Dawson say?" "He didn't sign the amendment. His mark was forged." Margaret set down her pencil. "Then we have it. Criminal fraud. Multiple counts. Your jurisdiction." Caleb pulled a chair up to the desk and sat down across from her. Close. Closer than he had ever sat to her voluntarily.
Listen to me, he said. Tom Dawson told me something. A surveyor named Rawlings rode out to Black Ridge's ranch in April. He never came back. His horse came home. He didn't. Margaret's face changed. Not fear. Something colder. Recognition. He was killed, she said. We don't know that. Yes, we do. You know it, and I know it, and everyone in this town knows it. They just don't say it because saying it means doing something about it. Caleb leaned back. If Black Ridge killed a man to protect his operation, then what we're dealing with isn't fraud. It's something worse. And the people who go after him need to understand that. I understand it.
Do you? Because understanding it from behind a desk with a stack of papers is not the same as understanding it when a man on a horse rides up to your door in the middle of the night. Don't talk to me about fear, Caleb. I've had a man twice my size pin me against a wall and tell me I would learn to be grateful. I know what danger looks like. I know what it smells like. And I'm still here. The silence that followed was heavy. Caleb stared at her. She had never told him about Kessler. Not the details, not the violence, not the bruise that had taken 3 weeks to fade. She had kept that locked away in the same place she kept everything that hurt. But now it was out, and she could not take it back. Who? Caleb asked. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. A man in St. Louis. A banker. He wanted to own me the way Black Ridge wants to own this valley. I said no. He didn't accept no. I left. Caleb's hands were flat on the desk. She could see the tendons in his wrists standing out like ropes. If I ever meet him, Caleb said slowly, I will break his hands. Margaret blinked. She had not expected that. Not the words, not the tone, not the absolute still certainty in his voice, like a man stating a fact about the weather. You won't meet him, she said. He's 1,000 miles away. Good, because if he were here, I wouldn't wait for a trial. They looked at each other across that small desk in that empty schoolhouse, and something passed between them that neither of them could name. It was not love, not yet, not the kind that announces itself with grand gestures and pretty words. It was something raw, something that lived in the space between two people who had both been broken and were both too stubborn to stay down. Margaret reached across the desk and put her hand on his. He did not pull away. He did not move. He just sat there and let her hand rest on his and breathed. We're going to do this together, she said. We're going to take every document I've collected. We're going to talk to every family who's been cheated. We're going to build a case so strong that even Black Ridge's connections in Cheyenne can't make it disappear. And when we're done, you're going to arrest him. Not because you're faster with a gun, because the law is on our side. And if the law isn't enough, then we make it enough. Caleb turned his hand over under hers, palm up. Her fingers settled into his, light, careful, like testing the weight of something fragile. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met, he said. I'll take that as a compliment. It wasn't one. I'm taking it anyway. He almost smiled. She saw it, that ghost of something warm behind all the granite and grief. It was there for half a second. Then it was gone. But it had been there. He stood up and took his hand back slowly. I'll talk to Judge Pearson in the morning. He's the one who told me to get married in the first place. Might as well make him useful. And I'll keep reading contracts. There are 3 more families I haven't talked to yet. Margaret. Yes? Don't go anywhere alone. Not until this is settled. Take Ruth with you. Take someone. Are you worried about me, Marshall? He put on his hat.
I'm worried about a lot of things. You're on the list." He walked out. Margaret sat alone in the schoolhouse. She looked down at her hand, the one that had touched his. She could still feel the calluses on his palm, the roughness of a man who worked with rope and iron and wood. She closed her hands slowly, and she allowed herself, just for one moment, to think that maybe this arrangement was becoming something else, something that neither of them had planned for, something that frightened them both for entirely different reasons. Then she gathered her papers, locked the door, and walked home. There was work to do. The next morning, Edgar Moss rode out of Red Hollow before sunrise. He took the North Road, the one that led to the Double B Ranch. Margaret saw him from the kitchen window. She watched him go and felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. Moss knew. He knew they were looking at the contracts. He knew what they would find. And he was riding to tell Blackridge. She found Caleb in the barn, saddling his horse. "Edgar Moss just rode north," she said. Caleb's hands went still on the cinch strap. "How long ago?" 5 minutes, maybe less." He tightened the strap and swung into the saddle. "Stay in the house. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone except Ruth or the Reverend." "Caleb." "I mean it, Margaret. Lock the doors." He rode out fast, and she stood in the barn doorway and watched the dust rise behind him like a warning. She did not lock the doors. Instead, she walked to the schoolhouse, gathered every document she had collected, wrapped them in oilcloth, and carried them to the one place in Red Hollow where nobody would think to look. Reverend Ames opened the church door and looked at the bundle in her arms. "I need you to keep these safe," Margaret said. "Hide them. Under the altar, in the bell tower, I don't care where. But if anything happens to me or Caleb, these papers go to the territorial governor." The Reverend took the bundle. His hands were steady, but his face was pale. "Mrs. Turner, what exactly have you gotten yourself into?" "Justice, Reverend. The inconvenient kind." He nodded slowly. "I'll keep them in the sacristy, behind the hymnals. Nobody's touched those in years." "Thank you." "Margaret?" He called her by her first name for the first time. "Be careful. Blackridge doesn't fight fair." "Neither do I," she said. She walked back to the schoolhouse and taught her morning class as if nothing had changed. She read the children a story about a girl who planted a garden in a desert. She corrected their letters. She praised their efforts. And every 10 minutes, she looked out the window toward the North Road, waiting for dust, waiting for horses, waiting for whatever Thomas Blackridge was going to do next. At noon, a rider came into town. Not Caleb, not Moss. A man she had never seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a coat too heavy for summer, and a gun belt that hung low on his hip the way a working gun hangs, not for show, but for speed. He rode to the saloon, dismounted, and went inside. 20 minutes later, a second rider came. Then a third. By 2 o'clock, there were 5 strangers in Red Hollow. All of them armed, all of them drinking in the saloon, all of them watching the street with the flat, patient eyes of men who were waiting for instructions. Ruth Haskell came to the schoolhouse at 3. "Margaret," she said, and her voice was tight. "Those men in the saloon. Danny Price. He works at the livery. He says they came from the Double B." Margaret felt her stomach drop. Blackridge's men? Hired guns. That's what Danny says. 5 of them. Maybe more coming. Margaret looked at the children in her classroom. 14 faces. Innocent. Unaware. "School's out early today," she said calmly. "Everyone go home. Stay with your families." The children gathered their things and left. Some of them looked confused. Some of them looked at the strangers' horses tied outside the saloon and understood more than children should have to understand. When the schoolhouse was empty, Margaret turned to Ruth. "Where's Caleb?" "Nobody's seen him since this morning." Margaret walked to the window. The 5 men were still in the saloon. The street was emptying, people pulling inside, closing doors, drawing curtains. Red Hollow was holding its breath. "Ruth, I need you to do something for me." "Name it." "Go to every family who brought me contracts. Tell them what's happening. Tell them to stay home, lock their doors, and keep their weapons close. And tell them, when the time comes, we're going to need them to stand." Ruth grabbed Margaret's arm. "Stand against what? Those are hired guns, Margaret. We're farmers and ranchers, and women who can barely hold a rifle straight. We're people with the truth on our side, and the truth doesn't need to shoot straight. It just needs to be heard." Ruth stared at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once, hard, and walked out. Margaret locked the schoolhouse door. She sat at her desk, and she waited for her husband to come home. Caleb came back at sundown. Margaret heard the horse before she saw him. She was standing at the kitchen window, the same window where she had watched Edgar Moss ride north that morning. And when Caleb came around the corner of the livery stable, she felt something release in her chest that she had not realized she was holding. He was alive. He dismounted and walked straight to the house. He did not stop at the barn. He did not unsaddle the horse. He pushed through the front door and found her standing in the kitchen with her hands braced against the counter. "You're all right," she said. "I'm all right." "Where have you been?" He pulled off his hat and dropped it on the table. His face was drawn. His eyes were harder than she had ever seen them. "I rode to Miller's Ridge, followed the diversion channel north. It feeds directly into Black Ridge's main reservoir. The man's been stealing water from 6 families for months, maybe longer. I marked the dam location and mapped the channel." "And then?" "And then I rode to Judge Pearson's ranch." Margaret straightened. "What did Pearson say?" Caleb sat down heavily. "He said I'm a damn fool. He said Black Ridge has connections in Cheyenne that could have my badge pulled before the ink dries on an arrest warrant. He said the last marshal, who crossed a cattle baron in Wyoming territory, ended up face down in the Platte River." "And after all that?" Caleb looked at her. "He signed the warrant." Margaret exhaled. "He signed it?" "Pearson's a lot of things. He's political, he's careful, he's a coward on his best day. But he's also a judge who's been watching Black Ridge buy up his territory for 20 years. And I think he's tired of pretending he doesn't see it." "So you have the warrant?" Caleb reached into his vest and pulled out a folded paper. He set it on the table between them. "Arrest warrant for Thomas James Blackridge. Charges: fraud, theft of water rights, and criminal forgery. Judge Pearson's signature and seal." Margaret stared at the paper. Such a small thing, such an ordinary piece of paper. But it was the first honest thing Red Hollow had produced in years. "There are 5 men in the saloon," she said. "Blackridge's men. They rode in this afternoon. Armed." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I know. I saw them when I came through town. Edgar Moss rode to the Double B this morning. He told Blackridge we're looking at the contracts." "I figured." "Caleb, those men aren't here to drink. They're here to stop you." "I know what they're here for." "Then what are you going to do?" He stood up and walked to the cabinet by the back door. He opened it and took out a shotgun. He checked the breech, loaded it, set it against the wall. "I'm going to serve that warrant," he said. "Tonight?" "Tomorrow morning. Daylight. Main Street. In front of the whole town." "Why not ride to the ranch? Arrest him there?" Because his ranch is a fortress. 15 men, fenced. One road in, one road out. I go there. I don't come back. So you bring him to you?
Blackridge comes to town every Thursday for supplies. Tomorrow is Thursday. He rides in with 2 or 3 men, picks up his order at the general store, and rides out. He's been doing it for years, like clockwork. He thinks he owns this town so completely that he doesn't even need to change his routine. Margaret sat down across from him. And the 5 men in the saloon? Their insurance. Blackridge sent them ahead to watch, to intimidate. But they won't start a fight without his order. Men like that don't think for themselves. They wait. And if Blackridge orders them to fight? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then it'll be a fight. You against 5 hired guns and whoever Blackridge brings with him. I've got Deputy Wells. Danny Wells can't hit a barn door. Your words, not mine. I didn't say he could shoot. I said I've got him. Margaret leaned forward. You need more than a deputy who can't shoot and a piece of paper, Caleb. What I need is for you to stay in this house tomorrow morning. Can you do that? No. Margaret, I said no. I'm not going to sit in this house while you walk into the street and get yourself killed. That's not partnership. That's sacrifice, and I didn't marry a martyr. You didn't marry me at all. You answered an advertisement. The words came out harder than he meant. She could see it on his face, the immediate regret, the flash of something that looked like shame. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. And you're right. I answered an advertisement. I married a stranger. I came to a town where nobody wanted me, and I made myself useful because that's what I've always done. But somewhere between reading contracts and fighting with you over supper, this stopped being an arrangement, Caleb, and you know it. He did not answer. You know it, she said again, quieter this time. He picked up the shotgun and held it across his body like a man holding a line. If I die tomorrow, he said, you take those documents to the territorial governor in Cheyenne. Reverend Ames knows where they are. Ruth Haskell will help you. Judge Pearson's signature is on that warrant. Even if I'm dead, the charges stand. Stop talking like you're already gone. I'm talking like a man who's done this before. I've faced men with guns, some of them faster than me. I'm still here because I was lucky, not because I was better. And luck runs out. Margaret stood up. She walked around the table. She stood in front of him, close, the way she had stood that night in the schoolhouse when she put her hand on his. And she took the shotgun out of his hands and set it against the wall. Look at me, she said. He looked. You are not alone this time. You are not standing in an empty house wondering why justice doesn't feel like anything. You have me. You have Ruth and Tom Dawson and Reverend Ames and every family in this town that Blackridge has robbed. You are not alone. His breathing changed. She could see it, the rise and fall of his chest going ragged, the way it does when a man is trying to hold something together that wants to break apart. Sarah would have liked you, he whispered. It was the first time he had spoken his dead wife's name to her with anything other than grief. Margaret touched his face, gently, the way you touch something you were not sure you were allowed to hold. Then let's make sure she'd be proud of what you do tomorrow. He closed his eyes. He leaned into her hand, just slightly, just barely, and she felt the weight of him. All of it. 6 years of silence and sorrow and a loneliness so deep it had become the walls of his house. Then he opened his eyes and stepped back. I need to talk to Danny Wells, he said, and I need you to do something. Name it. Talk to the men in town. Not the ranchers, the miners, the railroad workers. The men who've been out of work since the copper dried up. Some of them fought in the war. Some of them still have rifles. If I'm going to face Blackridge in the street, I need people behind me. You want me to raise a militia? I want you to remind this town that they don't have to be afraid. That's what you're good at. Caleb Turner, that might be the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Don't get used to it. She almost laughed. Almost. But the fear was too close, and the stakes were too high, and laughter felt like something that belonged to a different night. She picked up her shawl and headed for the door. Margaret. She turned. He was standing in the kitchen, with the lamplight behind him and the shotgun at his side, and that look on his face. The one she had seen the first day, when she stepped off the stagecoach, and he looked at her like she was something he was terrified to want. Be careful, he said. You too, Marshal. She walked out into the night, and Caleb Turner stood alone in his kitchen and pressed his hand to the place on his face where her fingers had been. He could still feel her touch. He was not sure when the last time was that anyone had touched him like that, like he was worth being gentle with. He picked up the warrant, folded it, and put it back in his vest. Then he loaded his revolver, took the shotgun, and went to find his deputy. Margaret went to the miners' camp first. It was a collection of tents and lean-tos on the east side of town, where 20 or 30 men lived in varying states of poverty and desperation. Most of them had come to Wyoming for copper. The copper had run dry 2 years ago. They stayed because they had nowhere else to go. She found them around a cook fire, passing a bottle, telling lies about better days. I need to talk to you, she said. A man named Hank Corrigan stood up. He was missing 2 fingers on his left hand from a mine collapse. He looked at Margaret with the suspicious patience of a man who had been promised things before. You're the marshal's wife, he said. The one teaching school. I am. What do you want with us? I want you to stand with your marshal tomorrow morning. Silence around the fire. Men looked at each other. The bottle stopped moving. Stand against who? Hank asked. Thomas Blackridge. A young man at the back of the group laughed. It was not a happy sound. Lady, half the men here used to work Blackridge's ranch before he brought in cheaper labor from down south. You think we're going to risk what little we got left to go up against a man who could bury us? I think you've already been buried, Margaret said. You're living in tents on the edge of a town that pretends you don't exist. You have no work, no land, no stake in anything. And the man who took all of that from you, the man who diverted the water and forged the contracts and hired guns to intimidate the people of this town, that man rides in every Thursday like he owns the place. Because he does. Because nobody has ever told him he doesn't. Hank Corrigan looked at her for a long time. The marshal put you up to this? The marshal asked me to remind you that you don't have to be afraid. I ain't afraid. I'm practical. There's a difference. There's not. Not when the result is the same. An older man near the fire spoke up. His name was George Whitfield. He had served in the Union Army. He walked with a limp from a mini-ball he took at Shiloh. What exactly is the marshal planning? George asked. He has an arrest warrant, signed by Judge Pearson. Tomorrow morning, when Blackridge rides into town, Caleb is going to serve it. Charges of fraud, theft, and criminal forgery. And the 5 guns in the saloon? That's why he needs you. Not to fight, to stand, to show Blackridge that this town isn't his anymore. George Whitfield pulled himself to his feet. He was 60 years old and broken in half a dozen places. But when he stood up, something straightened in him that had nothing to do with his spine. I've been waiting 10 years for someone in this town to say those words, he said. I'll stand. Hank Corrigan cursed under his breath.
Then he nodded. "I'll stand. But if shooting starts, I'm hitting the dirt. I ain't dying for nobody's ranch." "Nobody's asking you to die. Just stand."
One by one, the men around the fire nodded, some reluctantly, some with a fierce, quiet anger that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Margaret left the miners' camp with 12 men behind her promise, and a feeling in her chest that was equal parts terror and something she could only call hope. She went to Ruth Haskell's house next. Ruth had already talked to the ranch families. 7 men had agreed to come into town at dawn, armed, ready. "That's 19 men plus Caleb and Deputy Wells," Margaret said. 21 against however many Blackridge brings. "It won't come to shooting. Not if there are enough of us." Ruth looked at her with the hard, practical eyes of a woman who had buried 2 husbands. "It always comes to shooting, Margaret. Sooner or later. Then we make sure it's later." Margaret walked home after midnight. The town was dark. The saloon was closed. The 5 strangers' horses were still tied outside, which meant they were sleeping inside, which meant they were still waiting. Everyone was waiting. She pushed open the front door and found Caleb sitting at the kitchen table in the dark. His revolver was disassembled on the table in front of him. He was cleaning it by feel. 12 miners, she said. 7 ranchers, all armed, all willing to stand. His hands stopped moving. "You did that in 3 hours?" Turns out people have been waiting for someone to ask. He reassembled the revolver without looking at it. Click, click, click. The sound of a man who had done this 1,000 times. "Danny Wells is in," he said. "He's scared out of his mind, but he's in. And I talked to Ben Avery at the livery. He'll block the north road with his wagon so Blackridge can't run." "What about Moss?" "Moss hasn't come back from the Double B. He's either staying there or he's already on his way to Cheyenne to pull strings." "If he goes to Cheyenne, then we have days, not weeks. Whatever happens tomorrow has to be definitive. No half measures. Blackridge gets arrested, and the evidence gets filed with the territorial court, or everything we've done falls apart." Margaret sat down across from him. In the dark, she could barely see his face, but she could hear his breathing. Slow, measured, controlled. The breathing of a man preparing for something. "Caleb." "Yeah?" "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that I don't regret coming here. I don't regret answering that advertisement. And I don't regret marrying you." He was quiet for so long that she thought he hadn't heard her. Then he said, "When I wrote that letter, that advertisement, I thought I was doing a duty, checking a box, getting a judge off my back. I didn't think about the woman who would read it. I didn't think about what kind of person would travel 1,000 miles to marry a man who told her, plain as day, that he had nothing to offer. You offered shelter and protection. You said so. I offered walls and a gun. That ain't the same as what you needed. What do you think I needed?" He paused. "Someone who saw you. Not what you could do. Not what you could cook or clean or teach. Just you." Her throat tightened. "And do you? See me? Margaret, I haven't been able to stop seeing you since the day you stepped off that stagecoach and looked at me like you were daring me to disappoint you." She reached across the table in the dark, found his hand, held it. "Then don't disappoint me tomorrow," she said. "I'll do my best. Your best is going to have to be better than luck this time." "Yes, ma'am." They sat in the dark kitchen, holding hands across the table, and neither of them said another word. There was nothing left to say. The warrant was signed. The men were gathered. The guns were loaded. Tomorrow, Red Hollow would either become a town that stood for itself or a town that broke apart. And both of them knew that what happened in that street would determine not just the future of the town, but whether the fragile, stubborn, impossible thing growing between them would survive or die.
Margaret let go of his hand and stood up. "Get some sleep," she said. "You too." She walked to her room, stopped at the door. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "Your best is better than you think." She closed the door. He sat in the dark for another hour. Then he loaded the shotgun, set it by the front door, and lay down on his bed with his boots on. He did not sleep. Thursday morning came hot and bright and merciless. By 7 o'clock, Caleb was standing on the porch of his office with the warrant in his vest and the badge on his chest, and his revolver on his hip. Deputy Danny Wells stood beside him, pale as milk, holding a rifle with both hands to keep them from shaking. "You all right, Danny?" "No, sir." "Good. Scared men pay attention. Just don't shoot unless I tell you." "Yes, sir." The miners came first. 12 men walking up the main street from the east side of town in a ragged line. They did not look like soldiers. They looked like what they were: broken men with nothing left to lose. But they carried rifles, and they walked with their heads up, and they took positions along the storefronts the way George Whitfield told them to. Spread out, visible, steady. The ranchers came next. 7 men on horseback from the South Road. Tom Dawson was in front, sitting his horse like a man who had been born on one, with a shotgun across his saddle and a look on his face that said he had been waiting for this day longer than anyone. Ruth Haskell stood on the porch of the general store with 3 other ranch wives. They were not armed. They did not need to be. They were witnesses. And witnesses were the one thing Blackridge could not shoot his way out of. Margaret came out of the house at 7:30. She walked down the main street to the schoolhouse. She did not carry a weapon. She carried a leather satchel. Inside the satchel were copies of every contract, every forged amendment, every boundary map, and Tom Dawson's sworn statement about his mark. The originals were still hidden in the church. The copies were for the arrest. She stopped in front of Caleb's office. "You ready?" she asked. "Ready as I'll ever be." "The evidence is in here." She held up the satchel. "When you serve the warrant, I'll present the documents. Every charge backed by paper. Margaret, I want you off the street when he rides in." "I'll be on the porch of the schoolhouse. That's off the street." "That's 30 yards from where I'll be standing." "Then I suggest you make sure nobody shoots in my direction." He looked at her. She looked back. And for one moment, just one, the whole world narrowed to the space between them, and everything else fell away. "I'll see you on the other side," he said. "You'd better." She walked to the schoolhouse and stood on the porch with the satchel against her chest, and her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. 8 o'clock. The 5 men from the saloon came out. They saw the miners. They saw the ranchers. They saw the marshal and his deputy, and the women on the porch of the general store. One of them, the tallest, the one Margaret had noticed first, looked up and down the street, and then walked back inside the saloon. 2 minutes later, he came out with the other 4. They spread across the street on the north side, casual, hands near their guns, faces blank. 8:15. Dust on the north road. Everyone saw it at the same time. A murmur went through the crowd. Low, electric, like the sound a wire makes before it snaps. Thomas Blackridge rode into Red Hollow at 8:22 on a black horse with silver fittings, flanked by 2 armed riders and followed by Edgar Moss in a buckboard. He was 55 years old, thick through the chest and shoulders, with a white mustache and eyes the color of creek ice. He wore a black coat despite the heat, and a revolver on his hip that had ivory grips polished smooth from use. He pulled up in the middle of the street and looked around. He saw the miners, He saw the ranchers. He saw the women.
He saw Caleb Turner standing in front of his office with a warrant in his hand. And Thomas Blackridge smiled. "Marshal," he said, "looks like you've organized a welcoming committee." Thomas Blackridge. Caleb stepped off the porch. His voice carried clear and hard in the morning air. "I have a warrant for your arrest, signed by Judge Pearson. Charges of criminal fraud, theft of territorial water rights, and forgery of legal documents." Blackridge did not move. His smile did not change. "Fraud," he repeated. "That's a serious accusation, Marshal. You sure you want to make it?" "I'm sure." "Based on what? The word of a few illiterate ranchers and your mail-order bride who's been reading papers she doesn't understand?" Margaret stepped off the schoolhouse porch. "I understand them just fine, Mr. Blackridge." She opened the satchel and held up a stack of documents. 6 forged amendments to grazing contracts, all witnessed by Edgar Moss, all containing boundary changes that contradict the original land deeds, all benefiting your operation at the expense of families who couldn't read what they were signing. Blackridge's smile thinned. He looked at Moss, who was sitting in the buckboard with a face the color of old paste. "Edgar," Blackridge said calmly, "you told me this was handled." Moss opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "It doesn't matter what Moss told you," Caleb said. "What matters is you're under arrest. Dismount and hand over your weapon." Blackridge looked at his 5 men on the north side of the street. They were watching him, waiting. "Marshal," Blackridge said slowly, "I've built this territory from nothing. I've fed soldiers and supplied forts and kept this valley alive when the government forgot it existed. And you're going to arrest me because some woman from St. Louis thinks she can read a contract? I'm going to arrest you because you broke the law. Dismount." Blackridge leaned forward in his saddle. "And if I don't?" The street went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes you hear your own heartbeat. Caleb took 1 step forward. "Then I'll pull you down." Blackridge's hand moved toward his revolver, and George Whitfield's voice rang out from the storefront, old and steady and iron hard. "You reach for that iron, Blackridge, and 20 rifles put you in the ground." Blackridge looked. 21 men stood along both sides of the street. Miners, ranchers, working men with battered rifles and steady hands, and absolutely nothing left to be afraid of. Tom Dawson called out from his horse. "It's over, Thomas. We've seen the papers. We know what you've done. Every family in this valley knows." Ruth Haskell stepped forward from the general store porch. "My husband's signature was forged on your contract. My land was stolen, and I am done being quiet about it." One by one, the ranch wives spoke. One by one, the miners raised their rifles. Not aiming, just holding, just showing. Blackridge looked at his 5 hired men. They looked back at him, and he could see it in their faces, the calculation. 5 guns against 21. Not odds that any hired man would take. The tallest one slowly raised his hands, palms open, stepped back. The other 4 followed. Blackridge sat on his black horse in the middle of the street and watched his army dissolve. "You don't know what you've done," he said to Caleb. His voice was quiet now, stripped of charm, stripped of everything except the cold fury of a man who has just discovered that power, once lost, cannot be taken back by force. "I made this town. Without me, there is nothing." Margaret walked to the center of the street. She stood beside Caleb, not behind him, beside. "There are 21 families who disagree," she said, "and the stack of documents that prove you stole from every one of them. Dismount, Mr. Blackridge." Blackridge looked at her, at this woman.
This mail-order bride, this outsider, this nobody from St. Louis, who had dismantled his empire with a pencil and a stack of papers. "You," he said. "You did this." "We did this," Margaret said. "All of us." Blackridge dismounted. He handed his revolver to Caleb, grip first. Caleb took it, handed it to Danny Wells. Then he took the iron cuffs from his belt and locked them around Thomas Blackridge's wrists. The click of those cuffs echoed off every building on the street. And Red Hollow exhaled. Ruth Haskell sat down on the porch steps and put her face in her hands and wept. Not from sadness, but from the sheer, overwhelming relief of a weight she had been carrying alone for 10 years. Tom Dawson dismounted and shook George Whitfield's hand without saying a word. The miners lowered their rifles. The 5 hired men mounted their horses and rode north without looking back. Edgar Moss tried to climb out of the buckboard. Caleb pointed at him. "Sit down, Edgar. You're next." Moss sat down. Caleb walked Blackridge to the jail. Margaret walked beside him. The town watched, and when the cell door closed and the lock turned, Margaret leaned against the wall outside the jail and pressed her hands to her stomach because her legs were shaking so badly she was not sure she could stand. Caleb came out. He saw her. He crossed the distance in 2 steps. He took her face in both hands, rough hands, calloused, trembling. And he looked at her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had just shifted under his feet. "You're shaking," he said. "So are you." "Yeah, I am." He pressed his forehead against hers. They stood like that in front of the jail, while the whole town pretended not to watch. "We did it," she whispered. "You did it. I just wore the badge." "Don't sell yourself short, Marshal. You were terrifying out there. I was scared out of my mind. That's what made it terrifying." He pulled back just enough to look at her. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. His eyes were wet, and he did not try to hide it. "This isn't an arrangement anymore," he said. "I don't know what it is, but it ain't that." "No," she agreed. "It ain't." He let go of her face slowly, stepped back, straightened his badge. "I've got paperwork," he said. "I've got a school to reopen." They looked at each other for one more moment. Then they turned and walked in opposite directions. He toward the jail, she toward the schoolhouse. And neither of them looked back. But both of them were smiling. And Red Hollow, for the first time in 20 years, was free. The paperwork took 3 days. Caleb sat in his office from dawn until midnight, writing reports, filing statements, cataloging every document Margaret had collected. His handwriting was slow and deliberate. A lawman's handwriting, built for precision, not speed. And by the end of the first day, his hand was cramping and his eyes were burning, and the stack of papers on his desk had barely shrunk. Margaret came in at noon with food he had not asked for. "You need to eat," she said. "I need to finish this before the territorial marshal arrives." "You can't finish anything if you pass out at your desk." She set the plate down on top of a deposition. "Eat. That's not a request." He looked up at her. There were dark circles under his eyes, but something else, too. Something that had not been there a week ago. A steadiness. A clarity. Like a man who had been walking through fog for 6 years and had finally stepped into open ground. "You're bossy," he said. "You married bossy." "I didn't marry anything. You showed up." "And you're welcome." He picked up the fork and ate standing up because there was no room on his chair. It was buried under witness statements. "Judge Pearson sent a rider to Cheyenne," he said between bites. "Territorial marshal should be here by Saturday. Maybe sooner if they push." "And Blackridge?" "Still in the cell. Hasn't said a word since Thursday. Just sits there staring at the wall. Moss, on the other hand, won't shut up. He's been talking since I locked him in. Names, dates, transactions. He's trying to trade his way out. Can he? That's not up to me. That's up to Cheyenne. But the more he talks, the deeper Blackridge sinks. Margaret pulled a chair from the corner and sat down. Caleb, there's something I need to tell you. He set down the fork. What? Ruth Haskell came to see me this morning. She said 2 of Blackridge's ranch hands rode into town last night. Not the hired guns, regular hands, cowboys. They're saying Blackridge's foreman, Jessup Cade, is gathering men at the Double B. Caleb's face changed. Not fear, calculation. How many? Ruth didn't know, but the hands who came in said Cade is talking about a rescue, breaking Blackridge out. Cade's a foreman, not a general. Half of Blackridge's men were hired for wages, not loyalty. With Blackridge in a cell, those wages stop. And the other half? Caleb wiped his mouth and set the plate aside. The other half is the problem. What are you going to do? Post guards. George Whitfield and 4 of his miners volunteered for night watch. Tom Dawson's bringing his sons in from the ranch to cover the day. Danny Wells will stay at the jail around the clock. Danny Wells will fall asleep around the clock. That's why George is there. Margaret studied him. You've already planned this. I planned it Thursday night, while you were sleeping. I wasn't sleeping. I know. I heard you walking around your room at 2 in the morning. They looked at each other. The office was small and hot and smelled like ink and gun oil, and the space between them felt both enormous and impossibly thin. Caleb, after this is over, after Cheyenne takes Blackridge and the case is settled, what happens to us? He picked up his pen and turned it in his fingers. What do you mean? I mean this marriage, this arrangement, whatever we're calling it today. I told you, it's not an arrangement anymore. Then what is it? He set the pen down. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Open, unguarded, almost vulnerable. It was the face of a man who had spent 6 years building walls and had just realized that someone had been quietly dismantling them from the inside. I don't know what it is, he said. I know that when you walked into that street on Thursday with that satchel, I was more afraid for you than I was for myself. I know that when I come home and you're not there, the house feels wrong. I know that you are the most infuriating, stubborn, brilliant woman I have ever met in my life. And I don't know what to do with any of that. Margaret's breath caught. That might be the longest speech you've ever given. Don't expect another one. I won't. I'll just remember this one. She stood up. She walked to the desk. She leaned down and kissed him on the forehead. Light, brief, barely there. And then she straightened and walked to the door. Finish your paperwork, Marshal. He touched his forehead where her lips had been. Yes, ma'am. She left. He went back to his reports, and for the next 3 hours, his handwriting was worse than usual, because his hands would not stop trembling. Saturday came and went. The territorial marshal did not arrive. Sunday. Nothing. Monday morning, Caleb rode to Judge Pearson's ranch and found the judge packing a trunk. Going somewhere? Caleb asked from the doorway. Pearson did not look up. Cheyenne, personal business. Your rider never made it, did he? Pearson's hand stopped moving. He still did not look up. Edgar, Caleb said. You sent Edgar Moss's clerk as the rider, and that clerk rode straight to Blackridge's ranch instead of Cheyenne. Pearson sat down on the edge of his bed. He was 62 years old, and he looked every day of it. I didn't know, he said. I swear to you, Caleb, I didn't know the clerk was Moss's man. But you know now. I found out yesterday. One of my ranch hands saw the clerk at the Double B 2 days ago. So the territorial marshal has no idea what's happening here. No warrant has been filed. and Blackridge's people have had 4 days to prepare. Pearson finally looked at him. His eyes were red. I signed that warrant in good faith, Marshal. I believed in what we were doing. And now? Now I'm an old man who's wondering if he's made the last mistake of his life. Caleb stepped into the room. I need you to ride to Cheyenne yourself. Today. Right now. Take the warrant. Take the evidence. File it with the territorial court personally. That's a 3-day ride. Then you'd better leave now. Caleb, if Cade moves on the jail before I get back, that's my problem. Your problem is getting that warrant filed before Blackridge's friends in Cheyenne make it disappear. Pearson stood up slowly. He looked like a man walking to his own hanging. I'll go, he said, but I need you to understand something. If Blackridge gets free, if this falls apart, they won't just come for you. They'll come for everyone who stood in that street. Every miner, every rancher, every wife who testified. I know. And your wife, Margaret. She's the one who built the case. She's the one Blackridge blames. I know that too. Can you protect her? Caleb's jaw tightened until the muscle jumped. I'll protect this town, every person in it. Pearson buckled his trunk and carried it to the door. You're a better man than I am, Caleb Turner. That's not saying much today, Judge. Pearson flinched, but he deserved it, and they both knew it. Caleb rode back to Red Hollow with a new weight on his shoulders and a clock ticking in his head. 3 days to Cheyenne, 3 days back, 6 days minimum before help could arrive. And Jessup Cade was gathering men at the Double B right now. He found Margaret at the schoolhouse. She was teaching arithmetic to 11 children. The numbers were down because some families had pulled their kids after Thursday, afraid of what might come next. He waited until the lesson ended. The children filed out. Margaret erased the chalkboard and turned to face him. She read his face the way she read contracts. Carefully, thoroughly, missing nothing. It's bad, she said. Pearson's rider never made it to Cheyenne. The clerk was Moss's man. The territorial marshal doesn't know anything. Margaret sat down at her desk. She pressed her hands flat against the wood, as if steadying herself. So we're alone. Pearson's riding to Cheyenne himself, today. But it's 3 days each way. And Cade? Gathering men. Could move any day. How many men do we have? 21, same as Thursday. But some of them are tired, Margaret, and scared. Standing in a street with rifles when you know help is coming is one thing. Standing when you know it isn't is something else. Then we don't tell them help isn't coming. Caleb looked at her sharply. You want me to lie? I want you to lead. There's a difference. These people stood up because they believed in something on Thursday. That something hasn't changed. Blackridge is still in that cell. The evidence is still real. The law is still on our side. The only thing that's changed is the timeline. And the number of guns Cade is pointing at us. Guns don't win against truth, Caleb. Not in the long run. In the short run, they win just fine. And we're living in the short run right now. Margaret stood up. Then we shorten it further. We don't wait for Cade to come to us. We go to the ranch. We talk to Blackridge's men, not Cade, the regular hands. The cowboys who showed up in town 2 days ago. If half his men are only there for wages, we offer them something better. What could we possibly offer them? Land. The land Blackridge stole. When the case is settled, those properties revert to their rightful owners. Some of those owners are old. Some of them have more land than they can work. What if we offered Blackridge's men parcels in exchange for laying down their guns? Caleb stared at her. You want to bribe a cattle baron's army with his own stolen land? I want to give working men a reason to choose the right side.
That's not bribery. That's justice. He was quiet for a long time. She could see him turning it over, the lawman in him fighting the pragmatist, the letter of the law wrestling with the reality of a town that could not survive a siege. Tom Dawson would never agree to give up land, he said. Tom Dawson has 160 acres and 2 sons who can barely work half of it. He doesn't need to give up anything. He needs help. And Ruth? Ruth needs hay for winter. She needs hands to work the south pasture. She needs neighbors who aren't afraid of Blackridge anymore. Those cowboys at the Double B could be those neighbors. Caleb took off his hat and ran his hand through his hair. You've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about this since Thursday night. The arrest was the easy part, Caleb. Keeping this town together after, that's the real work. You sound like a politician. I sound like a woman who grew up in a bookshop and read too much history. Every revolution that fails does so because the people who started it didn't plan for what comes after. He put his hat back on. All right, I'll talk to the 2 hands who came into town. See if they're willing to carry a message to the others. I'll talk to Ruth and Tom about the land. Margaret? Yes? If this doesn't work, if Cade comes anyway, I need you to promise me something. I'm not going to like this promise, am I? If shooting starts, you take the children and the women and you go to the church. Reverend Ames has a root cellar underneath the sacristy. You go down there and you stay there until it's over. Caleb, this is not negotiable. I can face guns. I cannot face guns while worrying about you standing in the middle of the street with a satchel full of papers. Those papers are the only weapon that matters. Not if you're dead. The word hung between them like a gunshot. Margaret closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were bright with tears she would not let fall. All right, she said. If shooting starts, I'll go to the church. But you had better not make me a widow before I've even been a wife. The words hit him somewhere deep, somewhere below the badge and the duty and the 6 years of grief, somewhere that was still capable of being wounded. I'll do everything I can, he said. That's not good enough. It's all I've got. Then make it enough. She picked up her satchel and walked past him. At the door, she stopped and turned back. I'm cooking steak tonight, she said. And before you say anything, yes, I'm cooking it too long again, because that's how I cook steak. And you're going to eat it and say thank you. He almost laughed. It was the closest she had ever seen him come to an actual, genuine laugh. Not the ghost of a smile, not the twitch at the corner of his mouth, but a real sound that started in his chest and almost made it to his lips before he caught it. Thank you, he said, in advance. That's better. She walked out. He watched her go, and he stood in that empty schoolhouse and realized, with a certainty that was both terrifying and wonderful, that he was in love with her. Not falling, not leaning toward it, not considering the possibility. In love, present tense, absolute. He had not felt this since Sarah. He had not believed he could feel this since Sarah. And the realization did not bring him peace. It brought him a fear so sharp and so deep that it made the prospect of facing Jessup Cade's guns feel almost simple by comparison. Because guns could only kill him. Losing Margaret would destroy him. And he could not survive being destroyed a second time. The 2 ranch hands from the Double B were named Billy Pruitt and Sam Oakes. Billy was 23 and had worked cattle since he was 12. Sam was older, mid-30s, quiet, with a scar on his chin from a branding accident. Caleb found them at the boarding house. I need to ask you something, he said, and I need an honest answer. Billy looked nervous. Sam looked steady.
"How many men does Cade have?" Caleb asked. Sam answered, 8, maybe 9. 2 of them are the hired guns who came back after Thursday. The rest are ranch hands Cade's been working on. Working on how? Telling them the marshal's gone rogue, that the arrest was illegal, that Blackridge will be out by the end of the week, and anyone who didn't stand with him will be gone. "And you two?" Billy spoke up. "We left because we didn't sign on for a war. We signed on to work cattle." Cade started talking about riding into town with guns, and I told Sam I wasn't dying for a man who couldn't even remember my name. Would the others feel the same if they had a choice? Sam rubbed his chin. "Some of them, maybe half. They're cowboys, Marshal, not gunfighters. But Cade's got them scared. He's telling them if Blackridge goes down, they all go down. No work, no references. Nobody in the territory will hire a man who worked for a convicted fraud. What if I could offer them something better than a reference?" Sam's eyes narrowed. "Like what?" "Land. There are families in Red Hollow who need hands. Honest work. Some of them have more acreage than they can manage. If Blackridge's men lay down their guns and cooperate with the investigation, I'll personally see to it that every man who wants work gets a fair deal." Billy and Sam looked at each other. "You'd do that?" Billy asked. "I'm doing it right now." "Cade won't like it." "Cade's not being offered the deal. His men are." Sam was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "If you can put it in writing, a real document, with the judge's seal, I'll ride back to the Double B tonight and talk to the boys myself." "You'd go back?" "Those men are my friends. Some of them have families in town, wives and children they haven't seen in 2 weeks because Cade won't let them leave. They deserve a choice." Caleb extended his hand. Sam shook it. "I'll have the document ready by sundown," Caleb said. "I'll be back by dawn with an answer." Sam Oakes rode out at dusk. Billy Pruitt stayed in town because he said he was too scared to go back and too honest to pretend otherwise. Margaret wrote the document. She sat at Caleb's desk with a pen and paper and drafted a... "Right now, I'm a school teacher, writing legal documents in a marshal's office in the middle of Wyoming territory. Life is full of surprises." He signed the document. She sealed it with wax from the candle. "Now we wait," she said. Now we wait. They walked home together. It was the first time they had walked side by side in public, without some crisis driving them forward. Just walking. Together. Down the main street of Red Hollow, while the last light bled out of the sky and the air cooled from unbearable to merely hot. Margaret's hand brushed his. Accidentally. Or not. He caught it. Held it. Did not let go. They walked the rest of the way home holding hands, and neither of them said a word about it. Because some things do not need words. Some things just need to be allowed to exist. At the house, Caleb stopped at the front door. "Margaret?" "Yes?" "I'm not going to sleep in a separate room tonight." She went very still. "What?" "I've been sleeping across the hall from my wife for 3 weeks. I've been telling myself it's because this is an arrangement. It's not. I've been doing it because I was afraid. Afraid that if I let you close, really close, I'd have something to lose again." "And now?" "Now I already have something to lose. Whether I sleep across the hall or not doesn't change that. So I'd rather be where I want to be." Margaret looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were bright, her hands were trembling, but her voice was steady. "Then come inside," she said. He followed her through the door. She did not lead him to the bedroom. She led him to the kitchen. She put coffee on the stove. She sat across from him at the table where they had shared 100 awkward meals and tense conversations and careful silences. I want to do this right, she said. Not because we're scared, not because tomorrow might be dangerous, because we choose it. I choose it. Say my name. Margaret.
Say it like you mean it. He reached across the table and took both her hands. Margaret, I choose you. Not because a judge told me to, not because I was lonely. Because you are the bravest person I have ever known, and I am a better man for having you in my life. And I don't want to spend one more night pretending that's not true. She squeezed his hands until her knuckles were white. That's the second longest speech you've ever given, she whispered. I'm done talking now. Good. She stood up. She did not let go of his hands. She pulled him to his feet, and they stood in the kitchen face to face, close enough to breathe the same air. I choose you too, Caleb Turner, she said. I chose you when I stepped off that stagecoach. I chose you when you told me you had nothing left to give. I chose you when you were stubborn and silent and impossible. And I'm choosing you right now. He kissed her. Not the way a man kisses a woman in a story. Not grand, not dramatic, not the culmination of some perfectly orchestrated moment. He kissed her the way a man kisses a woman when he has been drowning for 6 years, and she is the first breath of air. Desperate and gentle and clumsy and real. She kissed him back. She tasted like coffee and dust and courage and everything he had been afraid to want. When they pulled apart, he pressed his forehead against hers. I'm still scared, he said. So am I. But I'm done letting fear make my decisions. Then we're going to be all right. You don't know that. No, but I believe it, and sometimes that's enough. He took her hand and they walked down the hall together, past her room, past his room, into the bedroom at the end of the hall, the one that had been Sarah's, the one he had kept closed for 6 years. He opened the door. She stepped inside. And he followed her in and closed the door behind them. And whatever happened on the other side of that door belonged only to them. Private, sacred, earned through weeks of stubbornness and silence and slow, painful trust. This was not an arrangement. This was a marriage. Sam Oakes rode back into Red Hollow at dawn. Margaret heard the horse from the bedroom. She was lying with her head on Caleb's chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the weight of his arm around her shoulders. Someone's here, she said. Caleb was already awake. She suspected he had not slept at all. He dressed quickly. She dressed quickly. They did not speak, but they moved around each other with a new ease, not the careful avoidance of strangers, but the natural choreography of two people who had decided to share a space. Caleb opened the front door. Sam Oakes was standing on the porch, hat in hand, dust on his boots. Well, Caleb said. Sam grinned. It was the first time Margaret had seen him smile. 5 men are coming in. They'll be here by noon. They're bringing their gear and their horses, and they're done with Cade. 5 out of how many? 8 total at the ranch. 5 said yes. 2 are still thinking. Cade's the holdout. So Cade's got 2 men and himself. 3 guns, that's it. And the 2 he's got are boys, 19, 20 years old. They're more scared of Cade than they are of you. Caleb leaned against the doorframe. What's Cade's plan? He doesn't have one anymore. When the 5 of us told him we were leaving, he pulled his gun. I thought he was going to shoot me. But Billy's brother, Jake Pruitt, stepped between us and said if Cade fired 1 round, the rest of them would put him down. Cade backed off. Is he still at the ranch? Last I saw, but he was packing. I think he's going to run. Let him. If he runs, this is over without another shot. Margaret stepped onto the porch. And if he doesn't run? Sam looked at her. Ma'am, Jessup Cade has been Thomas Blackridge's right hand for 15 years.
He's done things for that man that would make your stomach turn. If he decides to fight instead of run, it won't be for Blackridge.
It'll be because he knows that when the territorial marshal gets here, he's going to answer for those things. And a man facing a rope doesn't think about odds. The words settled over them like dust. Then we'll be ready, Caleb said. Sam, get some food and rest. You've earned it. Yes, sir. And, Marshal. Yeah? Your wife wrote a good document. Clear. Fair. The boys read it 3 times before they said yes. I think you married the smartest woman in Wyoming territory. Caleb looked at Margaret. I think I did too. Sam tipped his hat and walked his horse to the livery. Margaret turned to Caleb. 5 men, plus our 21. That's 26 against 3. If Cade runs, it's 26 against nobody. And if he doesn't? Caleb reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. It was such a small gesture, so ordinary, so human, that it made her heart ache. Then I'll handle it, he said. We'll handle it. There's that word again. Get used to it, Marshal. You're stuck with me. He kissed her forehead, quick, gentle, like it was something he had always done. Then he put on his hat and walked to the jail to check on his prisoner. Margaret watched him go. She pressed her hand to her forehead where his lips had been. Then she smiled, a real smile, wide and warm and unguarded, and walked to the schoolhouse to open the doors. 23 children showed up that morning, more than any day before. And Margaret Whitmore Turner, mail-order bride, bookshop daughter, contract reader, troublemaker, wife, taught them all. Jessup Cade did not run. Margaret found out at noon when Billy Pruitt came sprinting into the schoolhouse, white-faced and gasping, and said the words she had been dreading. He's coming. Cade's on the road. He's got the 2 boys with him, and they're armed and riding hard. Margaret stood up from her desk. 23 children stared at her. Everyone out the back door, now. Go home. Stay inside. Do not stop for anything. The children moved. Some of them cried. Some of them ran. A girl named Ellie Dawson, Tom's granddaughter, 9 years old, brave as nails, grabbed the 2 smallest children by the hands and pulled them out the back without being told. Margaret followed them to the door. Ellie, take them to the church. Reverend Ames is there. Go. Ellie nodded and ran. Margaret locked the back door, grabbed her satchel, and walked out the front. The street was already emptying. Women pulling children inside, men reaching for rifles, doors slamming shut up and down the block. She found Caleb on the porch of his office. He had the shotgun in one hand and his revolver on his hip, and that look on his face, the one that was not anger, not fear, but something colder. They were pushing hard when I saw them. Go to the livery. Tell Ben Avery to block the North Road again. Billy ran. Caleb turned to Margaret. Church, now. I know, I promised. She held up the satchel. The evidence copies are in here. The originals are still with Ames. Good, go. She did not go. Not yet. She grabbed his arm and pulled him toward her and kissed him. Hard, fast, fierce, in full view of anyone who was watching. Come back to me, she said. I will. That's a promise, Caleb, not a hope. It's a promise. She let go. She turned. She walked to the church without looking back, because if she looked back, she would not be able to leave him, and she had promised. Reverend Ames was waiting at the door. He had the children in the sacristy already. Ruth Haskell was there with 4 other ranch wives. How many? Ruth asked. 3. Cade and 2 boys. 3 against 26? 3 men who have nothing left to lose against 26 who have everything. Ruth nodded grimly. That's worse. I know.
Margaret went to the window that faced the street. She could see Caleb's office. She could see George Whitfield and his miners taking positions along the storefronts. She could see Tom Dawson on his horse at the south end of the street, with his sons flanking him. And she could see the 5 former Blackridge hands, Sam Oakes, Jake Pruitt, and 3 others, standing together in front of the general store. They had switched sides 2 hours ago. Now they were about to face the man who had been their boss. Margaret pressed her hand against the window glass and waited. Caleb walked to the center of the street. Danny Wells came up beside him. The deputy was pale and his hands were shaking, but he was there. He was holding his rifle and he was there. Danny. Yes, sir. If shooting starts, your job is the jail. You get inside and you guard that cell door. Blackridge does not get out, no matter what. Yes, sir. And Danny. Sir? You're a good man. Whatever happens today, I want you to know that. Danny Wells swallowed hard. Thank you, Marshal. Caleb looked up the street. Dust on the north road. Close now. Very close. George Whitfield called from the storefront. I count 3 riders, moving fast. Hold your fire, Caleb called back. Nobody shoots unless I give the word. Tom Dawson's voice carried from the south end. And if they shoot first, then shoot back. The dust grew thicker. The sound of hooves grew louder. And then Jessup Cade rode into Red Hollow like a man riding into hell, with 2 young cowboys flanking him, and a look on his face that Margaret could see even from the church window. Raw, desperate, burning with the fury of a man who had just watched his entire world fall apart. He pulled up 50 yards from Caleb and swung off his horse before it stopped moving. Turner, he shouted. His voice cracked the silence like a whip. You send my men back. You hear me? You turn them around and you send them back to the ranch. Caleb did not raise his voice. Those men made a choice, Cade. Same choice you can make right now. Lay down your weapon and surrender peacefully. Surrender? For what? I haven't done anything. You're here with armed men threatening a town marshal. That's enough. But I think we both know there's more. Cade's hand dropped to his gun. You don't know anything about me. I know about Rawlings. The name hit Cade like a physical blow. He took a half-step back. The 2 young cowboys behind him looked at each other. The surveyor, Caleb continued. The one who rode out to the Double B in April and never came back. His horse came home. He didn't. That's got nothing to do with me. Tom Dawson says Blackridge sent you to intimidate him. Edgar Moss has been talking in that cell for 4 days, and he's mentioned your name 11 times. When the territorial marshal gets here, and he is coming, Cade, they're going to ask about Rawlings, and somebody is going to answer. Cade's face changed. The anger was still there, but underneath it, Margaret could see something else. The cold, sick terror of a man who has just realized that the ground he's standing on is hollow. You don't have proof of anything, Cade said. But his voice was different now. Thin. Moss is giving us everything. Dates, locations, names. He's trading his way out, and he's putting you on every page. Moss is a liar. Maybe, but liars with details are convincing. And a jury isn't going to care whether you're a good man or a bad one. They're going to care about where Rawlings is buried. One of the young cowboys, a kid really, barely 19, spoke up from behind Cade. Jessup, what's he talking about? What happened to Rawlings? Cade spun on him. Shut your mouth. Did you kill somebody, Jessup? I said shut your... He did. Sam Oakes stepped forward from the general store. I didn't see it, but I heard it. April 14th. Cade rode out with Rawlings to show him the boundary lines. He came back alone. When I asked where the surveyor went, Cade told me he rode south. But Rawlings' horse was still in the bine. A man doesn't ride south without his horse. The street went dead silent. Cade turned in a slow circle. He looked at Sam. He looked at the miners with their rifles. He looked at Tom Dawson and his sons. He looked at the two young cowboys behind him who were staring at him like they had never seen him before.
"You're all going to regret this," Cade said. His hand was on his gun now, not drawing, just resting. "Every last one of you. Blackridge has friends you can't imagine. This isn't over because you put him in a cell. This isn't over because some woman from St. Louis read some papers. This will never be over." "It's over right now," Caleb said. "Take your hand off your weapon." "Or what?" "Or I'll do what I should have done months ago." Cade stared at him. 20 feet between them. Hot air. Dust. The sound of breathing from 30 people who were all holding perfectly still. The young cowboy behind Cade, the one who had asked about Rawlings, slowly raised his hands. He stepped away from Cade, walked sideways toward the storefronts, laid his rifle on the ground. "I'm done," the kid said. His voice was shaking. "I didn't sign on for murder. I'm done." The second young cowboy followed, hands up, rifle down, walking away. Jessup Cade stood alone in the middle of the street. "One man, one gun, one choice." "It doesn't have to end like this," Caleb said. "You can walk into that jail and tell us where Rawlings is. You can cooperate. You can face trial like a man instead of dying in the dirt like an animal." Cade's breathing was ragged. Margaret could see his chest heaving from the church window. She pressed both hands against the glass. "I've been working for Blackridge since I was 20 years old," Cade said. His voice broke on the words. "I gave that man everything. Everything. And he would have thrown me away the same as the rest of them." "I know," Caleb said. "That's why you need to put the gun down. Not for him. For yourself. There's nothing left for myself. There's the truth. That's worth something." Cade's hand trembled on his gun. Margaret stopped breathing. The whole town stopped breathing. And then Jessup Cade drew. He was fast. Faster than Margaret would have believed. His hand came up with the revolver, clearing the holster in one smooth motion. But Caleb was already moving. Not drawing, moving. Forward, closing the distance in 2 steps inside the arc of Cade's gun, too close for a clean shot. He grabbed Cade's wrist with his left hand and twisted, hard, and the revolver discharged into the dirt. The sound was enormous. A woman screamed from one of the porches. Horses reared. Caleb drove his right fist into Cade's jaw. Cade went sideways. Caleb held the wrist and twisted again, and the gun fell. Cade swung with his free hand and caught Caleb across the temple. Caleb staggered. Cade lunged for the gun on the ground. George Whitfield's voice rang out. "Marshal, down!" Caleb dropped flat. 21 rifles leveled at Jessup Cade. Cade froze. His hand was 6 inches from his revolver. He looked up and saw the barrels. Miners, ranchers, former Blackridge hands, all pointing at him. "Don't," Sam Oak said quietly. "Please, Jessup, don't." Cade's hand hovered over the gun. 6 inches. A lifetime. Then he pulled his hand back. He sat in the dirt and put his face in his hands and made a sound that was not crying and not screaming, but something between. The sound of a man who had just lost the last thing he had left. Caleb got to his feet. Blood ran from the cut on his temple.
He picked up Cade's revolver and handed it to Danny Wells. "Get him in the cell," he said, "next to his boss." Danny and George pulled Cade to his feet and walked him to the jail. Cade did not resist. He walked like a man walking in his sleep. The street exhaled. Margaret burst through the church door and ran. She did not walk. She did not maintain composure. She ran down the church steps and across the street, and she threw her arms around Caleb Turner so hard she nearly knocked him down. He caught her. He held her. He buried his face in her hair, and his shoulders shook. Just once, just for a second, before he pulled himself together.
"You're bleeding," she said. "It's nothing. It's your face. I've got another one." She laughed, a real laugh, high and bright and breaking. And then she was crying, and he was holding her, and the town was watching, and nobody pretended not to see, because some moments are too honest to look away from. "It's over," he said. "Don't say that until the territorial marshal gets here." "It's over, Margaret." She pulled back and looked at his face, the cut on his temple, the dust in his hair, the tears he would not acknowledge on his cheeks. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "I did." "Good, because I'm holding you to every promise from now on." "That's fair." She kissed the cut on his temple, gently, like she was sealing it shut with the touch. Then she took his hand and walked him to the office to clean the wound. And Red Hollow settled into a silence that was not fear. It was peace. The territorial marshal arrived 6 days later. His name was Colonel James Whitaker, and he rode into Red Hollow with 4 deputies and a wagon for prisoners, and a look on his face that said he had seen everything in his career, and was not prepared for what he found in this small Wyoming town. Judge Pearson had made it to Cheyenne. The warrant was filed. The territorial court had issued additional charges based on Edgar Moss's testimony. And when Colonel Whitaker walked into Caleb's office and saw the stack of documents Margaret had assembled, contracts, deeds, amendments, witness statements, boundary maps, and Tom Dawson's sworn affidavit, he sat down in the chair and read for 3 hours without speaking. When he finished, he looked at Caleb. "Marshal Turner, in 20 years of territorial law enforcement, I have never seen a more thorough case assembled by a town marshal." "I didn't assemble it," Caleb said. "My wife did." Whitaker looked at Margaret, who was standing by the window with her arms crossed. "Ma'am, you have a gift for documentation." "I have a gift for reading, Colonel." The rest followed. Whitaker stood up. "Thomas Blackridge and Jessup Cade will be transported to Cheyenne for trial. Edgar Moss will serve as a cooperating witness. The territorial court will handle the land disputes, but based on what I've seen here, I expect every forged contract to be voided and every property returned to its rightful owner." "And Rawlings?" Caleb asked. "Cade gave up the location this morning. Deputy Wells took the statement. We'll recover the body before we leave." Margaret closed her eyes. She had not known Rawlings. She had never met him. But the thought of a man riding out to do an honest job and never coming home, it hit her in a place that was still raw from her own journey. "His family should be notified," she said. "He had a sister in Ohio," Whitaker said. "We'll see to it." Blackridge was loaded into the wagon in chains. He did not look at Caleb. He did not look at Margaret. He stared straight ahead with the blank face of a man who had already begun the long process of pretending none of this was real. Cade went quietly. He had not spoken since the arrest, except to give up Rawlings's location. The fight had gone out of him like air from a punctured lung. Moss climbed into the wagon on his own, still talking, still bargaining, still trying to trade his way to a shorter sentence. The wagon rolled north.
The deputies flanked it. Colonel Whitaker tipped his hat to Caleb and Margaret. "You've done something extraordinary here," he said. "Both of you." "We had help," Caleb said. "A whole town's worth." Whitaker looked up and down the street at the miners and ranchers and wives and children who had gathered to watch the wagon leave. "So you did," he said. "So you did." He rode north after the wagon, and Red Hollow watched until the dust settled and the road was empty and the last sound of wheels faded into nothing. Ruth Haskell sat down on the porch of the general store and wept for the second time in a week. Tom Dawson shook every miner's hand and told them they were welcome at his ranch any time. George Whitfield leaned his rifle against the wall and said to no one in particular, "I haven't felt this useful since Shiloh." And Margaret Turner stood on the porch of the schoolhouse and watched her husband walk toward her with the sun behind him and the badge on his chest and no ghosts in his eyes. "It's really over," she said. "It's really over." "What happens now?" He stopped in front of her. "Now I go back to being a town marshal, settling disputes, keeping the peace. Boring work. You'll hate it." "Probably." "Good. You deserve some boredom." He leaned against the porch rail. "Margaret, there's something I need to say, and I need to say it while I'm not scared, and there aren't guns pointed at anyone, and the world isn't about to end." "That's very specific." "I love you." The words came out plain and unadorned and absolutely honest, the way Caleb Turner said everything, without flourish, without decoration, without any attempt to make them more than what they were. Margaret's eyes filled. "Say it again." "I love you. I didn't expect to. I didn't want to. I tried very hard not to. And you made it impossible." "I didn't make anything impossible. You just stopped fighting the obvious." "That too." She stepped off the porch and stood in front of him. She put her hands on his chest, over his heart, and felt it beating, steady, strong, alive. "I love you too, Caleb. I've loved you since the night you told me about Sarah and Emma. I've loved you since you fixed the schoolhouse roof. I've loved you since you ate my overcooked steak without complaining. Well, without complaining much. It was very overcooked." "I know. I'll work on it." "Don't. I've gotten used to it." She laughed. He smiled. A real smile, wide and warm and unguarded. The kind of smile that transforms a face and reveals the man underneath all the granite and grief. She had never seen him smile like that. She wanted to see it every day for the rest of her life. The months that followed changed Red Hollow in ways that nobody could have predicted. The forged contracts were voided by the territorial court. Every family got their land back. The water diversion was dismantled, and the creek ran south again, and the cattle fattened, and the pastures greened. 5 of Blackridge's former hands settled in the valley. Sam Oakes took a parcel next to Ruth Haskell's ranch and became the best neighbor she had ever had. Jake Pruitt, Billy's brother, the one who had stood between Cade and Sam, worked for Tom Dawson and married Tom's granddaughter Ellie 7 years later, though nobody could have guessed that on the day a 9-year-old girl pulled 2 children to safety during a standoff. The schoolhouse grew. Margaret taught 35 children by autumn. She trained 2 assistant teachers by winter. She started evening literacy classes for adults, and the first person to sign up was Hank Corrigan, the miner with the missing fingers, who said he wanted to write a letter to his mother in Pennsylvania and was tired of asking other men to do it for him. Ruth Haskell learned to read her own contracts. She went to the Territorial Land Office herself and filed the proper deeds for her property. She came back to Red Hollow with a look on her face that Margaret recognized. The look of a woman who has just discovered that she is capable of things she never imagined. George Whitfield was elected to the town council. He was the first black man to hold public office in that part of Wyoming. And when someone objected, Tom Dawson stood up and said, "This man stood with us when it mattered. If that doesn't earn him a seat at the table, I don't know what does." The objection was withdrawn. Caleb Turner remained marshal. He was quieter than before, which Margaret had not thought possible. But it was a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of a man walling himself off from the world, the silence of a man who was listening. He listened to the ranchers. He listened to the miners. He listened to the wives and the children and the old men who sat on porches and told stories about the way things used to be. And every evening he came home to Margaret. Not to an arrangement, not to a duty, to a wife, to a partner, to the woman who had walked into his broken life with a trunk full of books and a spine made of iron and had refused, absolutely, stubbornly, magnificently refused, to let him stay lost. On a blazing evening in late August, 1 year and 3 days after she had stepped off the stagecoach, Margaret sat Caleb down at the kitchen table. "I need to tell you something," she said. He looked at her. "You're shaking." "I'm not shaking." "Your hands are shaking." She put her hands flat on the table. They were, in fact, shaking. "I'm pregnant," she said. Caleb did not move. He did not speak. He sat in his chair and looked at her, and the color drained from his face so slowly that she could watch it go, like water running out of a basin, leaving nothing behind but the white porcelain underneath. "Caleb?" "I heard you." "Say something." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He stopped, swallowed. "How long?" 2 months, maybe a little more. I saw Doc Harmon this morning." 2 months? You've known for... "I suspected for 3 weeks. I wanted to be sure before I told you." He pushed back from the table, stood up, walked to the window, stood there with his back to her, and she could see his shoulders rise and fall with breathing that was too fast, too ragged, too close to breaking. "Caleb, talk to me." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because the last time someone told me I was going to be a father, His voice cracked. He pressed his hand against the window frame so hard his knuckles went white. "I held Emma the day she was born. She was so small. She fit in one hand. And I promised her, that I would keep her safe, that nothing would ever hurt her." Margaret stood up. She walked to him. She did not touch him. She just stood behind him and waited. "I broke that promise," he said. "I was 20 miles away chasing cattle thieves when those men came through. Sarah tried to hide Emma in the root cellar. They found her anyway." His voice was barely a whisper now. "I couldn't keep them safe. I had one job, and I couldn't do it. Caleb, turn around." He turned. His face was wet. He was not trying to hide it. He was not trying to be strong or stoic or any of the things the world expected of a man like Caleb Turner. He was standing in his kitchen crying, and he did not have the strength to pretend otherwise. Margaret took his hands. "Listen to me," she said. "What happened to Sarah and Emma was not your fault. You did not fail them. 3 evil men made a choice, and your family paid for it. That is their sin, not yours. I should have been there. You were doing your job, the same job you do every day to keep people safe. You cannot be everywhere, Caleb. No one can. But no, listen. You are not the man who lost his family. You are the man who brought their killers to justice. You are the man who protected this town. You are the man who stood in the street and faced Blackridge and Cade and every hired gun they could muster because you believed in doing what was right. That is who you are. He was shaking. She held his hands tighter.
"And now," she said, "you are going to be a father again. And I know that terrifies you. It terrifies me too. But we are not going to let fear steal this from us. Not this time. Not ever again." He sank. Not to his knees. His knees just gave out, the way a man's body surrenders when his heart can no longer carry the weight alone. He went down in front of her and pressed his forehead against her stomach and wrapped his arms around her and held on like she was the last solid thing in a world that kept trying to break him. "I will not let fear steal this from us," he whispered. Her words, given back. A vow. She put her hands in his hair and held him and let him cry. 6 years of grief and guilt and silence pouring out onto the kitchen floor of a house that had finally become a home. When he was done, he stood up. He wiped his face with his sleeve. He took a breath. Long, slow, deep. And when he looked at her, his eyes were clear. Not healed, not fixed, not magically repaired by a single moment of catharsis, but clear. "I'm going to be a father," he said. "You are. I'm going to be terrified every single day. So am I. But I'm going to do it anyway." "Yes, you are." He put his hand on her stomach, gentle, reverent, like he was touching something sacred. "Margaret Turner," he said, "you are the best thing that ever happened to this town, and the best thing that ever happened to me." "I know," she said. "I've been waiting for you to catch up." He laughed, a real laugh, full and deep and startled out of him. The first real laugh she had ever heard from Caleb Turner. It filled the kitchen. It filled the house. It filled 6 years of empty rooms and silent suppers, and a grief so heavy it had bent him nearly in half. She laughed, too, because the sound of his laughter was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard, and because joy, real joy, the kind that arrives after you have earned it through pain and patience and stubborn, relentless hope, is the most powerful force on earth. Stronger than fear, stronger than grief, stronger than any man with a gun or a forged contract or a stolen empire. Joy. That evening, they walked to the cemetery behind the house. 2 small crosses under the cottonwood tree. Sarah Turner, Emma Turner. Caleb had not visited these graves since Margaret arrived. She knew because the path was overgrown and the crosses needed paint, and the ground was hard and bare from neglect. He knelt between the graves and put one hand on each cross. "Sarah," he said, "I found someone. She's stubborn, and she overcooks steak, and she fights with me about everything, and she's wonderful. You would have loved her." Margaret stood behind him. Tears ran down her face, and she let them. "And Emma, sweetheart, you're going to have a brother or a sister. I'm going to do better this time. I'm going to be here, every day. I promise." He stood up. He turned to Margaret. "Thank you," he said, "for making me brave enough to do that." "You were always brave, Caleb. You just forgot." He took her hand. They walked back to the house. The evening was warm, and the sky was wide, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called, and another answered, and the sound carried across the valley like a conversation between old friends. Margaret stopped at the front door. "Caleb?" "Yeah? I never told you why I picked your advertisement. Out of all the letters I could have answered." "Why?" "Because you said, 'I am not looking for love.' And I thought, here is an honest man, a man who tells the truth, even when the truth is hard. A man who would rather be real
than be charming. That's what convinced you? My complete lack of charm? Your complete lack of pretense. In a world full of men who promise everything and deliver nothing, you promised nothing, and you've delivered everything. He pulled her close. He held her against his chest and rested his chin on the top of her head, and they stood on the porch of their home, while the night settled around them. I've been thinking about names, he said.
Already? If it's a girl, what about Sarah, after... Yes, Margaret said.
Before he could finish, before he could hesitate or second-guess or talk himself out of it.
Yes, Sarah.
And if it's a boy?
I like the name James, after my father.
He wasn't a perfect man, but he loved me. And he let me read every book in his shop. And that's the reason I'm here. James Turner. That's a strong name.
It's a good name.
He kissed the top of her head. James or Sarah Turner, born in Red Hollow, Wyoming, to a marshal who can't cook, and a schoolteacher who can't cook either. We'll figure it out. We always do. She tilted her head back and looked up at him. This man, this stubborn, silent, broken, rebuilt, terrified, courageous, infuriating, wonderful man who had written a letter expecting nothing and received everything.
I love you, Caleb Turner.
I love you, Margaret Turner.
Don't ever stop saying that.
I won't. Not even when you overcook the steak.
Especially when I overcook the steak.
He smiled, she smiled, and they went inside and closed the door on the world and all its noise. Because this was never a story about a mail-order bride who saved a town. It was a story about two people who had been broken by the world and refused to stay broken. A man who thought he had nothing left to give, and a woman who showed him he was wrong. A town that learned to stand up, and a marriage that taught them how. Not built on desperation, not built on loneliness, built on courage, built on truth, built on the stubborn, relentless, unshakable belief that love, real love, earned love, chosen love, is worth every risk, every fight, and every overcooked steak. And in Red Hollow, Wyoming, in the summer of 1876, that was enough. That was everything.